we have 11 p.m. in Germany, and say hello from Cologne. And let's start with my presentation. So, SharePoint retention and labeling deep dive. But at first, please mark your calendars with Microsoft on Microsoft 365 collaboration conference in Las Vegas. Hopefully next year. In the COVID crisis, no one knows, but hopefully next year we will meet in person in Las Vegas, and it's not too hot there, and have a view at our sponsors in this conference. So this is a default slide. I hope every one of you knows our sponsors, for example, SharePoint or Swoop, or CoreView or Valo Intranet, all of this. So please have a look at the websites, meet the sponsors, and see some interesting new topics or tools like governance tools from SharePoint or the new intranet from Valo. This is a advertising slide. So let's start and introduce myself. I have two slides. My name is Raphael Koellner. I am executive consultant at BDO Digital. It's a part of BDO Worldwide, and it's a company from Germany with a lot of locations in Germany and a lot of partners worldwide. I'm working there with the special topics of compliance and the Microsoft secretary or the Microsoft board there. And I'm very happy to talk about today about retention and labeling. This is one of my favorite topics. Yeah, I work in this part and I make it as a hobby and private. So I hope you enjoy the session. And I'm one of the 12 Microsoft regional directors here in this conference and one of the 100 Microsoft regional directors worldwide. And I'm also Microsoft MVP for Office Apps and Services and Windows Insider, and one of the Microsoft Teams elite team. And yeah, you know, I'm a community guy, founded the Azure Meetup, the Office 365 community in Germany, and make a lot of conferences like Build the last 6 years, Build last 2 years, and Ignite last 6 years, Ignite the Tour the last 2 and 3 years, with a lot of conferences. So I hope I meet some of you in Orlando or in Tel Aviv or maybe in Johannesburg in the last year. And I'm living in Cologne. So now my normal speaker slide. Here you see my email address and Twitter, and also the websites of the community, and yeah, a picture of me. And now you see me also live, and I'm also hosting the SharePoint Saturday in Cologne in Germany, also the Azure Saturday, and some conferences. And what is typical for the conference? You can have a revel, and now in this conference you can get one of 3 Oculus Rift. So type in the URL, make a screenshot in this moment with your phone or with your PC, or type it in directly and then answer the question and be a part of the raffle. One more that is a very good thing is please donate if you can to the International Media Corps. Please have a look at the websites and help them, for example, to fight against the COVID crisis and make a little bit for charity. So that's also very important. So make a picture with your phone and let's start with the session. I prepared a session, and yes, only SharePoint retention fulfill a whole session. So I will talk about a little deep dive information about retention of SharePoint Online, and then also on labeling. And on labeling, I'm very happy. The automatic labeling, and this is a little sneak peek of my session, is GA today. It's GA. Announcement is 3 hours old. So I'm very happy to show you the newest GA features of SharePoint Online automatically labeling. This is also a part of my session. And so let's start with the introduction. I hope every one of you knows SharePoint Online, knows the typical address of SharePoint Online, and knows the typical things out of a compliance view on SharePoint Online. The primary development from Microsoft is one of the main things. So the new features, and we talked about, for example, on this conference, Project Cortex, or also the auto labeling, for example, is a feature that comes at first for SharePoint Online, and also the default location, like for the view from Germany or in Europe, we have it in Switzerland, Germany, France, Norway. Norway is really new. Ireland, Holland. It will be in Italy and also new in Italy. It's a preview, so we will have it in Italy and also in Spain. We see the announcements, and in Tel Aviv it's online, and so more and more default location for SharePoint Online. It's one of the core tools you see in the contracts. I hope every one of you have a look in the contracts. SharePoint Online is one of the core tools in the attachment 1, and you found it in the Microsoft Online terms, the OSTs, and it's a part of the EU. The EU model clauses are in connection with SharePoint Online, and also the DPA attachment, the new one, you can find under aka.ms/DPA. And all of you knows, and I have a session today with Microsoft Product Group, is SharePoint a part of the Microsoft 365 group in the background, and then when it's a part of Microsoft 365 group, it's also part of Teams and Yammer. And who of you who visit my Yammer session 6 hours more at 12 noon in Germany, you know that SharePoint is now the default storage for Yammer. If you migrate with a native Yammer mode, with a native mode in Yammer, then you have the SharePoint as a default storage, and you know OneDrive as a client, with some interesting situations when you delete and you have retention policies on a file, but we will talk about a little bit later. And for the next slide in introduction, I have some data residencies of SharePoint Online, and you see what I talked about. Some we have announced. We have some all of in region and some in country. For example, in region is also the wrong color. Is it in Germany, for example, and in Switzerland, and we have in UK and also in Norway in region, and in region, that's right. And we have also in US Gov, and the German Gov cloud is also possible. So SharePoint is everywhere. And today, for example, is also announced the new migration manager for SharePoint, and Microsoft bought Mover some month before. So we have more and more tools for better migration to SharePoint Online. And yeah, so let's have a look a little bit deeper. For example, in the licensing part, I created 2 slides here. We have to talk about licensing. I add some more spaces here than the normal licensing guides. The normal one is only SharePoint Plan 1 and Plan 2. I add, for example, the invite part, so you can add externals to your SharePoint, to the teams, to groups, and also to your Yammer communities, and they can upload files, or they can also handle with the files in your tenant, and it's part of the limits of your tenant. And we have the rule 1 to 5, so 1 licensing rules of 5 guests. If the guest uses, for example, a conditional access and some payment features or paid features. So that's one of the main interesting things for the most of you, I think. And we have one more, Teams 3, and Teams 3 one has only 2 gigabits space, free space to use with SharePoint Online, but you have SharePoint Online and OneDrive, but you don't have any of the compliance tools. So this is only for example, for your family. So that's also an announcement that we will see Teams Personal, or a part of the classic of hotmail.de or outlook.com accounts. Your personal accounts will have Microsoft Teams, and also a part of this is SharePoint. And then we have the classic SharePoint plans, with 1 terabit of storage for a user in SharePoint 2, and unlimited, which mostly have 5 terabit of storage at first for the users. And these are the limits you have to know, and you have to remember a little bit later when we talk about retention. and then I will explain why you have a look at your storage and why it's so important that you know how much storage you have. And when you handle, or when you say, for example, your OneDrive storage for your customers, or for your attendees, for your customers in your tenant, for your colleagues, for example, has only 500 MB. That's not a good idea when you work with retention policies, but let's have a look a little bit later about this. And I created also a slide about the Microsoft 365 plans, so that you see invite guests and external is possible and everywhere. I only choose the typical plans, for example, Office 365 F1 for the first line workers outside. And you see where you have SharePoint Plan 1 and SharePoint Plan 2. SharePoint Plan 2 has advanced governance and advanced tools and advanced e-discovery, for example. So I recommend SharePoint Plan 2. That's the best way you can handle, and you have unlimited storage. That's important for retention. So one more, I have a view out of Germany and global Germany. For the most of you, you see it. Yes, we have now global, in this year started global Microsoft data centers in Germany, one in Frankfurt, the main one, and one in Berlin. And yes, we have these contract view with contracts with Ireland, with Microsoft Corp, for example, in connection with the support. And SharePoint Online is a part of Frankfurt, of the data center, and also of Berlin. And we can host our data now in region in Germany. So this is my typical contract view, and this is important to see where's your data stored, and when you upload something, where it is stored, and what is in the background. For example, in every SharePoint Online since the last 7 years, there's, for example, the Fort Knox principle, where every data will be encrypted with keys and a central key, and all of these default security locations. So that was the introduction. 14 minutes, that's fine. Let's start a little bit deeper. I choose this picture because at first we have a look at SharePoint Online labeling and retention, and then we have a deeper look in retention, and at the end in labeling with a unicorn. And I don't tell it now. I tell it a little bit later what it happens with the unicorn. And at first I have a short view on the questions. I have 2 new questions. Okay, at first there's someone you don't hear it, and okay, here, Raphael, okay, that's perfect, you can hear me, I hope. So thank you very much. Okay, everything is fine, we can go forward. So if you have questions, you type and use the Q&A functionality, or send me an email, or use Twitter. So labeling and retention. At first, this is a very long story. For example, starting with IRM and SharePoint 2007, I can remember this. With this SharePoint version, I start with SharePoint, and I started with IRM. And a little bit later with a PowerShell solution to classify the sites. But I can't see it in the admin center. I have to use PowerShell to see which site has which class, and which site has which site has external access, for example. And we have typical the retention policy of SharePoint. Everyone of you knows the same is with Exchange, for example, in placehold, and the retention policies. And we have a deeper look today into retention and labeling. And I'm very happy about sensitivity labeling in combination. I hope, and my wish, and if someone from the product group views my session, please combine both things, retention and sensitivity labeling, or only the chance that sensitivity and label can be also connect with the retention policies. That would be really awesome. So I know we need more retention policy than sensitivity labeling. For example, I have 4 label, and for example, for every label 2 or 3 sub-label, and retention policies for a worldwide company I have around 250. So yeah, it's not the best idea to combine everything, but to combine a label with a retention policy. That was my wish. I posted also in user voice, so we will see what happens in the future. One more, have a look at labeling and retention. And I hope you see my little flags at the document and also at the SharePoint side. That is what is possible for with labeling and also with retention, for example, and the retention label to the document, for example. And yeah, you see the first error about it, or the first line about it. This is the Office 365 group, and then we have in frame the Teams and Yammer, and it's also possible to use auto labeling and you use it manually, or you can use a provisioning with Microsoft Graph, for example. This is a very good solution. You can use Microsoft Graph to add your label and your retention policy to files and also to SharePoint sites. So this is very luxury, and I will show you a little bit later. I created, and I can't show you the exactly dashboard, but I can show you the structure. I created a dashboard, and in my last session I talked about it. Everyone wants to have this dashboard, and yes, you can send me an email, and then we can have a look. If you have a if you can have this dashboard, or you can have this dashboard to see which label we have, which are the retentions, and if you're provisioning a new site, you have the correct retention label and the correct sensitivity level to the SharePoint sites, to the groups, to Teams, and to Yammer. This is a very cool new feature. And what I liked, and it goes GA in the last 3 weeks, in the last 3 weeks ago. The 3 weeks ago, you see the URL at the bottom of the page, and it's know your data. And that is very important for me. You see here out of my environment, so you see some German words like geheim, it's a secret, for example, on the side, or Datenschutz, it's data privacy in English. And you see here, for example, an overview about the data, and this is very important. You see an overview about retention and also sensitivity labeling. Where's my data? Which label has my data? Where's the typical content? And yes, this is a view from an E5 licensing. So I have also automatic labeling and all of the informations. And you see train about classify, we'll talk a little bit later. And know your data, this is very important. The Content Explorer and the Activity Explorer, the global admin or the admin of the Compliance Center, where you can find these data classification rules, have to you need a second right, so access rights for Content Explorer and Activity. That's a part of privacy by design and security by design, that the global administrator and the compliance administrator didn't have the access directly to the content. And if you get the access to the users, they can have a view what happened in your environment, and you don't need, for example, to go to Microsoft Cloud App Security. The Microsoft Cloud App Security is then the very special thing to have a deeper view into the files. Here you have an overview and have also a view in the Content Explorer to a special file, but you can't have a look into the file. But this is possible with Microsoft MCAS. And if we have a look at the portals, that we have a look a little bit later, but we have an interesting thing about the differences. So sensitivity labeling is on the security portal, and we have here, for example, differences in retention labels. And I show you one of the examples here. You see you can define in the information governance, in the compliance center, you can define here, for example, that's right. For example, label classification and record. I'll talk a little bit later what it is. And in the other center, you don't see it. So you have 4 options to define retention labels. For sensitive labeling, only 2, the Azure portal and the security center. But for retention labels, you have more options. And you see here, for example, the differences. So it's the best way to use the security center, not the compliance center, to define your labels, because there's the option for record and record management. And the record management it's very important, and I have a look at the record management in the next 2 slides. I switch him to the record management. The record management fulfills the rule 70A4 and also GOBD in Germany. That tells that the file which has a policy the user can't add or can't delete or can't add the metadata, all of this. And we have a look at the special label classification in retention. And you see here, if you type on the little RE for information, if content is classified as a record, user won't be able to edit or delete the content or change or remove the label. This is very important. So no manual labeling for these retention labels when you choose these 4 records. This is this is you have to, you must do it for the rule and also for GOBD, that no one can change the label and also no one can change the content. And if you have a look a little bit deeper, there's also the sentence, however, they still be able to edit the content's metadata. And everything, oh, metadata, oh, what is the metadata? What they mean with metadata? And I tested it today, 2 hours before the session to validate it. And yes, that's what, if you have a look deeper in the documentary, and if you have tested it, the documentary is not perfectly in this thing. So the user cannot edit and cannot change or remove the label of the file. But it's very important to know, yes, the user can work with the file. I will have a process slide a little bit later. For example, there's a second author for the file or the file name change. That is all fine, but you can change the label and all of this. So it works with the process, with the label process. But he cannot or she cannot edit or delete or change all of the metadata of the document in the compliance storage. So when the policy is matching with the document, the copy will be moved to the compliance storage. There, the user can't change anything, but he can change with his file. Moreover, I will show you a little bit later process slide where you can show it and demonstrate it. And then if the user edits the metadata, delete the document will be stored in the compliance storage. So you have more and more copies and you see it. And so, yeah, it is okay. And Microsoft had also a certificate for this so that it's compliant with GOBD and also Rule 78.4. This is very important to know. And this is with this little thing. You can make a mark here and you can classify it as a record. And once more, if you classify the rule, you can make these settings not changeable, so that the administrator can't change the label. This is possible with a PowerShell script. That is 2 sentences or 2 lines. And with these 2 lines, no one can change the retention label in the future. So be aware what you do there, but it's possible too, so that you can fulfill all of the compliance rules with the onboarding tools. So we can talk a little bit later about if you need third-party tools in this connection. You don't need it because it's possible in this connection with the compliance rules. You don't need it because it's possible with onboarding tools. And so have a look to this immutability. To have a little bit deeper look. So this is the objects that you can store, that no one can change it, and that you can have a look at it in the different versions with eDiscovery, for example, that are, for example, the meeting request, the documents, also documents shared on online meeting, the voicemail. So we have Exchange and SharePoint ones together, and we have tools like legitation hold, in place hold on Exchange side, and also the retention policies and mailbox outing. So this is Exchange and SharePoint together, and it's possible. And if we have a look, and I say to you, show you the processing slide. You see here the processing slide. So you have a document, and it matches with one of the labels. It moves to the compliance storage or presentation hold storage, and the users are working with this. For example, there's a second user in collaboration with the document, and every time there is one of the copies to the retention storage which the users don't see, don't recognize if the user don't know it that it happens, and only the administrator can have a look at the documents and can extract the documents so that you can restore all of the document out of the compliance storage. And that's one of the important things, and that no one can change the label, that no one can change the document, and edit the document or delete the document. And this is possible with onboarding tools. So this at the first view and the first deeper view in retention of SharePoint and also of a little bit of Exchange. And the first topic, let's have a deeper view in these retention things and retentions with SharePoint Online. And yeah, we have a lot of rules around the world. I collected around 5,800 around the world, and I show you a little bit, only a small part of it, and also part, yes, of Germany. I come from Germany, so I use the rules from Germany, and let's have a look at first, and I hope every some of you know, and yes, we have a difference between backup and archive, and yes, archive have a different different texture here. That is, yeah, in my choose. So backup is emergency restore, and with the 2-3-1 principle, I think everyone of you knows. And there you have a different discussion because you pay for the services. If the data center will be get a fire or a lot of water or like this, then the Microsoft will restore your data and will put your data into another storage or into another data center, in the backup data center, so you have access to the data. And this is one of the discussion, or one part of the discussion. You have to decide if you need a backup of your data. More and more companies today say, no, we don't need a backup. We pay for the backup for Microsoft, and we don't need it because we have an SLA. But this is a risk decision and a risk assessment decision, so everyone can decide how they want to handle the backup. And the other side, the archive, and this is the typical one with retention policies, and also you can use third-party tools for it, but it's also the most like 85-89% of the situations you can handle it with the onboarding tools and compliance with all of the requirements. I have a matching with a compliance team in Germany and also with some guys from Microsoft Corp and the product group, and we can match from the requirements 95%. So we can archive with onboarding tools all of the documents and also the sites, the groups, and also Microsoft Teams at the end, and the SharePoint site in Teams. If we have a little bit deeper look, for example, in the requirements, we have here Germany, so that is spelling Deutschland, that is Germany in English, and we have the requirements, for example, GOBD or also GDPR or HGB, that's Handelsgesetzbuch, that's law about economy and the contracts between companies and how you handle it. And on the other side, you have, for example, the USA, that is only an extract of the worldwide requirements for retention. And we have the same also, and some of these are included in these, for example, GDPR ones, also for sensitivity labeling. In Germany, we have a special law about the law of the secret business data. This is really new out of the last year. So we have to implement in Germany a data security system. If we don't have it, we can't fight against people, they break the NDA. So this is very important, and I know a lot of similar rules worldwide, so that we need sensitive labeling and retention labeling for SharePoint Online and for our documents as a SharePoint Online as our centralized document storage. And yeah, one more, come from Germany, and there comes also the flag. So from Germany and also from UK, that's also possible. I marked here UK because we have the Brexit, and this is one of the compliance challenges in this year in Europe. because the UK will leave the EU, and we have the period now to the end of the year, and at the end of the year, the UK have to leave, and we have issues with, for example, with the contracts between UA and Germany and UK and Europe. And in this connection, it's very interesting that we have to proceed our personal data in Europe because there's no contract. So we have no GDPR law with UK at the beginning of next year, and no contract about work proceeding and working with personal data. So that's very important. That's why I marked every time UK, and nearly not the same, they don't leave, but it's also interesting, for example, for Japan, there are some special rules like these NDA rules also. So these are some examples also here in this question. And if you have these rules, you have to match these rules. And I told you I speak with you about some rules from Germany. For example, the first one, this is out of the finance sector. So the national agency for the finance institute, they say, for example, I need your copy of your bills in the next 14 days. And we need your bills like the GOBD rule, or like the rule I told you before from USA, that's nearly similar. So we need the data, and you need your builds that don't change, that have also the same quality and the same metadata than before. And I show you a little bit before how you can deal with it. And this is one of the regulation. And for the financial department, for example, in the company, or for HR, it's possible with onboarding tools. So you can fulfill all of these rules, and you have to think about, for example, the most of the companies said, the most outside of Germany said, okay, we have to delete, for example, in US or also in Brazil, we have to delete after the time period we have to retention of the document. And in Germany, the most said, okay, we don't delete, we keep it, we keep the files. But for me, for example, you have 3 years, and 3 years back, you have to give the data to the financial institutes, the regulations, the national regulation agency, and in this time, that's fine. And after that, if you don't need it, for example, that's 5 years and 7 years, and after that, you can delete your data because you don't need it. And for me, that's, you have to decide if you delete or you stay with the data, and then you make this matrix and build this matrix for your rules. So at the end, this very interesting thing, do you need a third-party tool? And you hear me, and you demonstrate you that the most of the compliance rules are matching with the onboarding, are matching this year with the onboarding, with all of the development in sensitivity labeling, also in retention, with, for example, the new record management and the file plans. So more and more of these features come to the Office 365 environment and to SharePoint Online, also to Exchange Online. So for me, yes, it's valid to have Quest 8.VM or to use your own QNAP or Synology for smaller companies to restore and make a backup of your data, or use the archive solution from 8. or Quest or whatever. But you have a look. This, for me, is more and more for the special solutions for example, high regulated companies, or for companies they don't have a backup of the backup. This is also possible. So all the solutions are valid, but the most is only possible to make with onboarding tools. But this is your decision if we need it or not. We can have a discussion a little bit later, or via Twitter if we need it. So one more second step to retention in SharePoint, a little bit more deeper. If you have a look at some limits, and I have an example here of the SharePoint retention limits. For example, one of the policy, when you filter, and you have to filter, you see here we have 100 groups, Office 365 groups, or 1,000 sites, or 1,000 mailboxes you can add. So if you have more than these, you have to create new retention policies. And for me, I told you, for example, for a little bit bigger company, I have around 250 retention policies, and you can't nested policies, and you can't group or regroup retention policies. But yeah, you can use PowerShell and also Microsoft Graph to create it, so you don't have to click every time. But that's also your decision. For the basement rules, you can make also rules for your overall environment to make a baseline protection of retention, for example, 1 year. So every draft and everything will start for 1 year or for 6 months. This is possible. And then you follow the metrics we built before and create retention policies. And for example, this is one, and I told you 3 times, and you see it on challenges, the storage. Often we see in the middle market, also KMUs and the smaller companies, they only have a few users but have more and more files. And you have to know that the retention and the compliance storage, for example, where you where the copy of your data, and whereas every time if you change or edit a file, there's a copy. This is a quota, and it's a part of the quota of the SharePoint site, and also quota of your OneDrive. So it can happen, and this is one of the challenges and one of my examples, my default examples. If you have a company that changed from typical V drive or L drive from the local NetApp or local storage to OneDrive and to SharePoint, and the most of your users stored the PSD files as a backup, and they put the files from the local storage into OneDrive, and I have a retention policy on it, for example, for 5 years, and I see it in real life, and the user get 1 terabyte of storage, and after 3 months, or after 2 months in this example, after 2 months, they have only 5 pictures, 10 documents, and 1 PSD file in it, and has a storage limit of 80% of 1 terabyte, and fulfill in 5 months 5 terabyte because of the PSD file and the retention, because every change of the PSD file, every new calendar invite, every new task, we will have a copy. So this is one of the challenges you have to know, and this is one of the examples. I collected around 25 examples of these. You have to put in your adoption process and have to talk about it. And then one more, and we talk about SharePoint as a part of Teams and groups and Yammer. This is a part of, or this is a slide from Microsoft Build, one of the Microsoft Graph sessions, and I like it very much because here you see the architecture out of Microsoft Graph View. You can make a screenshot, or you can have a look at the Microsoft Graph sessions at Build. They are available on YouTube, and here you see the root and the root sites. And please remember a little bit later when we talk about sensitivity and also retention labels. But for retention labels, yeah, I can tell it in this moment. If you have a retention label, no, I don't tell it now. I tell it a little bit later. So I remember it when we talk about sensitive labeling, because what happened with retention policies and delete, for example, of a group and restore a group after the 30 days. This is a little sneak peek I tell you in the next 10 minutes about what happened there and what can you restore. So let's a little bit forward. For example, tool overview, we have retention policies, record management, auto retention, e-discovery, and in-place hold for the SharePoint side for OneDrive, and also then in this connection for groups, Microsoft 365 groups, Microsoft Teams, and Yammer communities, which are the new names of it. So have a look a little bit deeper what happened. And you see here, for example, create an adding process. If you create a slide and you don't have auto labeling, for example, nothing happens. If you create a slide and create a document, and every time you create a document, you type in and do something, and then one of the policies matching, for example, a DP policy. So you add, for example, an IP address to the document, and then a copy will be created. it and go to the compliance storage. And this happened every time. The same thing on the OneDrive side. When you have a sync to your Windows desktop in the Explorer, there's also a sync process included. And when it's synced, and then we have a copy to the SharePoint drive. And it's, yeah, that is really default. If we have a deeper look to the deletion process, it's more complicated. So if you have a deletion process, it moves to the cycle, to the site recycle bin, to the second stage recycle bin, and then at the end to deletion, and all over 93 days. If we have a retention policy over it, then it moves only to the recycle bin and will be stored with the end of the retention, because retention goes for deletion. That we have a look a little bit later. For OneDrive, we have the situation that if you delete in the Explorer, it moves to the Windows recycle bin, and if you then restore it, can be happen that you have different files. So this is a little bit of the interesting situations with OneDrive, SharePoint Online, and the Microsoft 10 recycle bin. If you want to know more about it, we can talk later or hear this session of Hans Brender, where he talk a little bit deeper about what happened at the Windows storage. One of my favorite features is restore for OneDrive and restore for SharePoint. This is that the user can restore 30 days the files. And in a view on the clock, I will only show you how to define a label. I think every one of you knows how to define a label. You go to the security center, to retention label, start, choose a label, or at first define a label, define a file plan that is new. That is very important to structure it and to use a record manager where we use E5. Then to make a label settings for 3 years. That is, yeah, you create the labels to connection to your matrix, and then at the end, for example, make a record of it. You don't have to, but for something like builds, you have to make a record of it. And for example, after 3 years or after 10 years, it will be deleted. You can make more and more label settings, up to 10,000 per tenant. So that's enough for everything. I don't reach the limit in the last 10 years. And after the create of the label, you publish the label, you choose the locations of the label, and then you publish the label, for example, and then for SharePoint and OneDrive, there's everything fine. For Exchange, the mailbox needs 10 MB of data, so the welcome message to every user will be a 10 megabyte email, so that's not a big issue. And then you have also auto labeling, which has happened with first part with schemata, with DLP policies, which I use very often. You have more than 100 in the last times, or you choose phrases or keywords, and at the end you choose trainable classifier. You train before. Trainable classifier are a part of machine learning. You need 50 to 500 files in a OneDrive or in a SharePoint. You train your own trainable classifier. A typical solution for it is builds. Yes, builds. I train it for builds. So that every bill in the company will be automatically get a retention label about 3 years. So if the financial agency will come to me and say, okay, give me the file, I can have a look at it about know your data and say, okay, if you need a file, I can extract it with eDiscovery, for example, or go to my employee and said, okay, give me the file, and we can handle it out. This is very easy, and you can exclude something like in the HR department for trainees, for example, you can exclude, or for doctors, they have another and special retention policies and everything of this. If we have one more slides here, and then we switch to sensitivity labeling. So yeah, this is more retention today. And we see here, for example, if we create and the label is matching, we see what happened. If we content editing, it goes to the compliance and presentation hold. And if we delete it, it goes always to the presentation hold. And if we delete it, it goes to the recycle bin. And then it will delete. And we have a time of 93 days. There's always a grace period of 3 days. If you have a deletion after 1 day, that's also possible. You have always 3 days grace period in it. This is a security decision of Microsoft that if we have a policy that automatically deletes a file after retention period, that the administrator has 3 days to hold this back or to restore this file, for example, with e-discovery. And this is the official, the official slide. Oh, it's time to go to bed for me. So this is the official slide. This is very important. And the last one, one of the last ones is what I tell you before: retention wins over delay, longest retention period wins. So if you have different retention policies for the same file, the longer one period wins, and also the automatically wins for manually, and the shortest deletion period wins. The last one is is the last one in this principle, and this is, for me, it's the hardest one, is the shortest deletion. But when you have retention policy and longer retention policy, that's not a very big issue. And the last one, then, this is GA, is a record manager you can use. And in this time, let's have a little view on the dashboard at least. So I created for the retention policies main page with an overview, so you have a little bit better overview than Microsoft have it in the compliance center. You can create it out of the Microsoft graph and with the audit policies. But yeah, know your data is really great, but not the best one. You can have a lot of views in the user voices for it, but yeah, we can create it for our own with Power Apps and Power Automate and all the Azure functions. And I have an overview about the deletion policies, retention policies, so you can filter, for example, every deletion policies and also all of the retention policies. And I have a link to all of the admin centers, so I can define all of the metrics here and see all of the information out of the metrics. So this is retention, and I can talk, and you see the most of the session is retention, because this is one of the topics everyone missed, and everyone missed to define it and define the metrics and use it for using the retention policies. What more and more people did and do is sensitive labeling. And in a part of the time, yeah, this is sensitive labeling with a unicorn. Why with a unicorn? Because I'm so really happy, because we have today, and now it's 5 hours, or now it's nearly 6 hours ago, that is general availability of automatic classification with sensitivity labeling. And this is really awesome, because it's automatically for also, yeah, it's for SharePoint Online and also for on-prem services, and it's automatically labeling with what I show it to you with trainable classifier, with DLP, and that's, yeah, I'm very happy about it. You need E5, yes, but it's working very well. So let's a little bit go one step back to have a view what happened. If you have a document, and this is one of my lovely default slides I found on Ignite 2018, and I edited it, and love this slide because this is a document, and you see with all of the tools you can use to protect, to react, for example, or to use also conditional access. And there's also a very new hint, for example, for conditional access. It's in preview today. It will be GA in the next month, I hope, is conditional access of a single SharePoint site. So this is really awesome. You can use conditional access, and I tested it and it works. Combine it with terms of use and MFA to have access, for example, for all of your guests to a single SharePoint site, and also a single SharePoint site in a Yammer group or in a Teams group. And it works really great. And I hope all of this will be GA in the next months. And yeah, this is a little bit sneak preview of this, and these are the tools, and one of the part is sensitivity labeling, which is GA now, and also the automatically part. If you have a overview and an architecture overview of sensitivity labeling, I created this slide. Sensitivity labeling, it's another part as retention policies. You need a little bit more. If it need all of the environment, you need endpoint protection. So you need the AMS package E3 and better E5. In E5 you have auto labeling and also the scanner from the on-premise version and on-premise environment. So you have for example, for Office and all of this, you see it here, the Office, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, it is natively, you have some limits, for example, in Excel, with the native limit is 60,000 line spaces, 60,000 line, 60,000, 15,000 lines with native. If you roll out the unified labeling client, you have 50,000 lines in Excel, so you have some limits, but it works really well. It works also on mobile with the mobile Office apps. Everything of this is GA. If we have a look a little bit deeper, you see, for example, one of my test environment screenshots. You can define labels and sub-labels, for example, also with offline access to the file. And one of the highly recommendations of me, use sensitive labeling. Don't share any file. Use only a sharing link. So don't send a copy of a file via email, but this is also possible to use exchange rules and also DLP, that no one shares a file or copy a file and shares it. So only share files with a sharing link, and share files with are labeled. So that's, for example, I created a default label called internal. So every file is internal. It's not encrypted, but with access policy and a label. So it's a very good hint. And also I created, for example, data privacy ones. So I can have an overview at the end, and it's natively. So it's very smooth. And it's also very smooth to use the auto labeling, and this is what is GA now. And you see here live slides I created 50 minutes, no, 60 minutes before. So I make a new screenshot for you, and this is the part, this is GA, and I can show you the GA solution, and you see it here. You create one of these labels, and then you can say, okay, I choose the SharePoint site, and you have to choose a SharePoint site. There I have a wish that you can search for a site. Today you need the exact URL, and then you type in the URL, and then you found and can select the site. For example, your intranet site, or also you can add the OneDrive accounts. And that I was really happy, and I added, for example, here for Germany, yes, for Germany P2 data. I can create more rules, I can create more filters, and it works for Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive accounts. You see it here, and it works automatically, and this is really awesome. And also you can combine it with trainable classifier. And at first, if you create it, you simulate the rule. And if it works really great, you can roll out the rule in your whole company. And this is one of my favorite things. And now it's GA, and I'm very happy about it. But there is more and more auto labeling. Someone of you knows, for example, if you have a file like a Word file with a secure, and you put it in your email, and the email is default internal and secure is more secret, then the email will be automatically labeled to secret. And if a secret label has an encryption, the label will be automatically use the encryption, or S-MINE, for example. So this is one of the auto labeling things in the background. This is working really well. Or you use exchange rules.
How you doing?
Yeah.
Good.
Hey.
Ready to roll?
Hello.
Hello. So, two last.
Yeah, we're almost there. Do you want to share your video, or you just want to go content only?
I hear you. So the last two slides.
That's you. Sure, that's okay.
Yep, go ahead.
cue that up.
So 2 slides more, and I will show you, for example, and this is very important with SharePoint Online. For example, you can use auto labeling for your files. I train it and use it for example, for my CV and for pictures and PDFs. And here's 2 minutes ago. This is my test file, and you see it in the column, in the new column. And here you see it's confidential, for example, and confidential access to all employees, and you can label manually and with auto labeling and with unified scanner. Also on-prem, if we have a deeper look, you can see the combination of retention, label, and also with sensitivity labeling if you have a view into the compliance details of your document, and also you can change the retention label very easily. It's a little bit hard if you have more than 10 retention labels, for example, but there can be a solution to create a little app to show to have a better view to the retention labels. And if you have interest in all of these applications, send me an email and we can talk about it. And if you have a look more deeper in the new SharePoint Admin Center, you see the sensitivity label also on your intranet site, for example, on your site here, and you see also the columns, and you see more and more information, what had happened, what is the labeling, and what is the sensitivity label, and which policy you push here. And the last information and the last slides are the about Microsoft Teams, because SharePoint is a part of Microsoft Teams. So for SharePoint side, it's very easy, and for Teams, it's also possible that you can use a label to create Teams and create a SharePoint site in the background with a label. And that's very interesting. You can create it. You see it here with sensitivity labeling. So the team must be private and without any external guests. So you can make your governance of Microsoft Teams also with sensitivity labeling and governance and sharing and access policies to your SharePoint site behind of Microsoft Teams. It's the same for Yammer. And if we have the last interesting slide, I make a copy for you. If we have a look, it don't works. We use it here. If we have a look in the team, I created a global HR team. The global HR team has internal, so no guests in there. It's a sensitivity label that works. Then we have a look at the files, and private 2 is a private channel. So we have created, I created a private channel, and you see here the retention label and also the data privacy, the sensitivity label. So yes, it works automatically, auto labeling, and in the provisioning process, or if you label it manually or use the auto labeling for retention and sensitivity to the private channel in Teams. So normal channel classic is fine, SharePoint Online is fine, and private channels is also possible. So I like it, and it the last thing you can see here is you see it also in the document library, and you see also here the columns.
Raphael,
I'm ready.
I hate to interrupt, but we do need
fine.
to
I'm ready. That's just the last slide. So thank you very much.